Hello, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Whiff. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepardson at BChad50. We're talking about fades and stacks here on this podcast, as we do. Telling you which games we're going to target with offense, which ones we're going to be playing the pitchers and avoiding, and which games just really aren't worth wasting your bankroll on in tournaments. So we're going to start off here at the top. We'll give you the odds and everything for each game. First game, Miami at Philadelphia. This one looks intriguing because you got two pitchers on the mound that are just not very good, especially Chad Billingsley. Kohler's a decent pitcher, but due to the fact that there just really aren't that many good hitters on either side, we talked about before the show, this just seems like one of those games that's really not worth stacking because even if you do get production, neither of these teams really have much chance of going off for 8 to 10 runs, which is really just kind of telling you you're putting this lineup in just to be contrarian, and that's not the way to go on a big slate.
No, we talked before the podcast, and it was Miami, Philadelphia. I don't want any piece of that next, and that's where my mindset is. You're not going to use any of the pitchers in it. You might use some one-offs from the game, but you're not going to be stacking. I don't even see many stacks that are worth it in that game. So that's a game that you're going to want to avoid. And as we said on before the podcast, in our prep, next.
Yeah, exactly. Next game is Baltimore-Detroit, and there is a little bit of potential here. 8.5 run total. Obviously, Vegas thinks this is a stackable game as well. David Price, of course, a minus 138 favorite. Kind of surprised that he's not a bigger favorite, but it's also a Detroit team missing their best hitter, of course, and Miguel Cabrera. And Baltimore offense that is dangerous, especially against lefties. So this one's going to be interesting. Certainly, you want to target Chris Tillman with as many Tigers righties as you can. Certain switch hitters, maybe Victor Martinez, you want to get in there as well. So Detroit, as always, going to be an expensive stack, but a very viable stack tonight. Of course, your JD Martinez, Yoenis Cespedes, Victor Martinez, whoever else you want to throw in there, maybe Rajai Davis or Anthony Gose, whoever ends up leading off, or even if Ian Kinsler leads off. This is one of those situations where you want to get a Detroit stack, but they're not going to be an under-owned stack, so you're going to have to get creative to set yourself apart. One thing I've done a couple times with Detroit stacks is I leave Ian Kinsler out because he really doesn't have a whole lot of power. You've seen a couple random big games here and there, but throughout the season, just 3 home runs. So maybe get creative with it. Maybe throw in like a Jason Kipnis instead of him, someone else, and then just get creative because Detroit's going to be one of the most popular stacks tonight.
Yeah, and popular for good reason. I mean, Chris Tillman has been awful this year, and he does a poor job of keeping the ball on the ground. So you've got power hitters like Martinez and both Martinez's and Yoenis Cespedes who can put a charge into the ball. So those are really the main guys that I'm looking at in this stack. Even if you go mini stack and maybe go something like the 3 through 5 spots in the lineup, you're going to want to target power against Chris Tillman. So as you said, drop a guy like Ian Kinsler off of it, maybe even drop the leadoff hitter and go that 3 through 5 and grab those guys. And because Miguel Cabrera is not in the lineup, it is an expensive stack still, but it's not as expensive as it was with him in the lineup. So at least it's a little bit easier. And on FanDuel, you get the added benefit of filling catcher with a Victor Martinez, which is a nice move as well. So do like the Tiger stack. Baltimore, wish they had a few more hitters that I really like. I think you can mini stack this to be contrarian because they are playing Price, and Price is very good, but maybe hook Adam Jones and Matt Wieters together. Both of them hit left-handed pitching really well. Manny Machado better against righties than lefties, but at this point, Manny Machado is a superstar, and I don't mind grabbing him. Maybe going him followed by Jones and Wieters, and you get what should project to be the 1, 3, and 4 hitters in that lineup. Drop the 2 hitter out of that, and you'll have what should be a low-owned stack. Not one that if you're sticking in just one lineup, you don't want to go with it, but if you're sticking in a ton of lineups, definitely some potential there, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, even guys like Steve Pearce hit lefties pretty well. And An interesting stat that I saw with Chris Davis, who I never used to play against lefties, but he actually has similar numbers, a higher WOBA against lefties than righties this year, a little bit less of an ISO. But, I mean, obviously he strikes out a ton. But, you know, like you said, mini stacks, maybe a couple different mini stacks. You're playing a lot of lineups, but David Price still not a pitcher that I'm going out of my way to pick on.
Nope.
All right, Texas at Houston, Scott Feldman versus Colby Lewis. Depending on when this game happens, this year, last year, a couple of years ago, seemingly 20 years ago, these guys, it looks like a game that you would love to have both sides of. But I don't think that's necessarily the case today. It is an 8-run total. Scott Feldman, a small favorite. Wind blowing out a little bit, but obviously Minute Maid Park has a roof. 8-run total here, so there's going to be some fireworks, but you and I were talking in the earlier show on the FanDuel podcast that Colby Lewis has actually been a pretty good pitcher this year. Still bad against lefties, so I think the way I'll be going in this one is I'm getting myself some Houston lefties as a mini stack, some Colby Rasmus, some other guys like that, and then, on the other side, Texas, definitely a very viable stack, especially with Scott Feldman just now returning from the DL. Love targeting pitchers on their first time back from the DL, so I think all these guys, especially the lefties, Fielder, Odor, if Chu's back, maybe him, whoever's at the top of that lineup, Mitch Moreland. You can actually stack Moreland with Fielder on FanDuel, which you can't do on DraftKings. So I think it's a very viable stack on that side.
Yeah, I mean, you got to love the Rangers lefties against right-handed pitching this year. So definitely one of my favorite stacks tonight. I do like them quite a bit. Minute Maid Park, great ballpark for offense too.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the next game. Chicago Cubs at the Atlanta Braves. I won't be stacking the Braves today. They scored, I believe it was 11 runs in their final 4 games before the All-Star break, 3 of those in Coors Field. So if this offense without Freddie Freeman can't even score runs in Coors Field, I don't expect them to score against anyone, especially John Lester, who when he's good, when he's on, one of the better pitchers in the game. He's gone 7 innings in 3 straight. So starting to get it going there a little bit. Not touching the Atlanta batters. Really not a big fan of any of them as far as stacking goes. But this Chicago team certainly in play as far as a stack. Lots of good hitters top to bottom against lefties. Starting at the top, you got Dexter Fowler, who's cheap. You got Chris Bryant, of course, Anthony Rizzo, who also crushes left-handed pitching. This entire team really in play for me today, and it's going to be one of the more fun stacks to do, especially because you've got your Addison Russell batting ninth, wraparound stacks. A lot of things you can do with them tonight.
Yeah, I like the Cubs. I think you've got some substantial upside there, and the lefty that's in that lineup, or that's in the part of the stack that you're looking at, is Anthony Rizzo, and he's absolutely hammered lefties the last couple years. Really turned a deficiency into a plus for him. So I'm definitely a fan of the Cubs stack tonight. And as you pointed out, there's some wraparound potential as well, which is unusual for a National League club, but you got it here. So I do like the Cubbies quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting stack tonight. But like we said, Atlanta, no thanks. Next up, Pittsburgh at Milwaukee. Whenever you hear the words at Milwaukee, you know that there's some stack potential, at least on one side. And that's going to be the case tonight. Obviously, Francisco Liriano, a good pitcher, but still an 8-run total here. Liriano, a small favorite at minus 128. Jimmy Nelson has gotten mashed by left-handed batters this season. Big-time struggles there. This could be a really interesting one. Milwaukee, a team who you were talking before the show. We were mentioning how the Brewers have a lot of hitters who throughout their careers have crushed left-handed pitching. If you look at this year's numbers, not so much the case, but all these guys in play. Braun, Gomez, Chris Davis, Aramis Ramirez, Jonathan Lucroy, all these guys have crushed lefties throughout their career. So not saying it's a stack you want to do if you're making maybe 2 to 3 teams, but really interesting stack if you're making a lot of teams because Liriano has had his issues with walks, not so much with the long ball, but he's definitely a very beatable pitcher when he's not hitting his spots.
Yeah, and I mean, the Miller Park factor is a biggie too. Great venue for offense. Again, if you're playing only a few lineups, not going to want to go crazy throwing out Brewers, but if you're sticking in, 10, 11, 12, 50, 100 lineups, the track record is long for a lot of these lefty mashers. Braun has murdered lefties for his career. All the guys that you mentioned have a long track record, with the exception of Davis. But Davis has done it every year he's been in the big leagues. He hasn't been in the big leagues as long as the other guys, but really hammers left-handed pitching. So definitely like the Brewers as a stack that should fly under the radar. And then on the other side of things, Pirates look pretty good, as you noted. Jimmy Nelson struggles more with left-handed batters than righties, but righties like Andrew McCutcheon are pitcher-proof anyway. So I do like the Pirates a bit. They get a break from PNC Park, which is nice for them. Get to go to an offensive-friendly venue like Miller Park. So I'd say both sides of this game are stackable.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you there. I think that both these are probably going to fly under the radar, like you said. So it's going to be a really interesting one as well. Next up, Cleveland at Cincinnati. With Corey Kluber on the mound, obviously, Cincinnati, you're just stacking him to be contrarian. They've hit some elite pitchers well this season. Not so much Corey Kluber. He had his way with them last time out. And with Anthony DeSclafani on the mound, that's certainly a guy you can target. He's been okay against lefties, 314 WOBA allowed, slightly below average this year, but this is still one of the better hitters parks in all of baseball. So 7.5 run total. Obviously, Kluber, big favorite, minus 165. Keep your eye on this one, though, because there has been a chance of storms. As someone who lives in Ohio, there's been flash floods all week long, flooding all over the place, tons of random rain. So there's a little bit of a risk to this one. I don't think it's a significant risk, but definitely if you're stacking one side of this, it's going to be the Cleveland bats. But you got to make sure you get some power bats in there, because there's a lot of these guys that are contact hitters. Guys like Francisco Lindor don't have a ton of upside, but guys like Brandon Moss, you certainly want to get a part of. And Anthony, or not Anthony, I'm thinking baseball Finney. Michael Brantley, definitely a guy you wanted to. So I'm thinking mini stacks here. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in agreement, and this is one where maybe you skip a guy like Francisco Lindor, you grab Kipnis, you grab Brantley, and you make sure that you get a guy like Brandon Moss, who probably will hit a little bit lower in the order. He has not hit very high in that order. He's hit behind David Murphy, who is not a power guy. Maybe mini stack 2 spots in the lineup. Maybe grab Brantley, Kipnis, and Santana, and then skip a spot and grab Brandon Moss. And all of a sudden, you've got some of that power, some left-handed power at Great American Ballpark in your stacks. So, I do like the mini stacks. I wouldn't advocate a 1 through 6 stack. I just don't think there's a ton of upside with that. You got too many slap singles type of hitters in there, guys that just can't really muscle up. But I do like the Indians a bit, and I mean, as you said, you're certainly not picking on Corey Kluber, not with the guys in the Reds lineup currently. So Kluber is a pitcher that we're going to be targeting to use, but not targeting with bats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you said, when you're making your stacks, it's all well and good to get yourself a full team stack, but I want power on my stacks because I want guys who can, with one swing of the bat, pay out their salary and then some. Not a lot of those guys in that Indians lineup, like you said. Brandon Moss, the guy with the biggest upside, certainly. Next game, not a very stackable game. St. Louis hosting the Mets. 7-run total, tied for the lowest on the night. Lackey, a minus 146 favorite. Wind blown out a little bit, but nothing significant there in St. Louis. Lackey, a very consistent pitcher. Not a great guy, not a dominant pitcher, but a guy that gets it done. He doesn't give up a whole lot of base runners, doesn't give up a lot of hard contact, doesn't give up a lot of home runs. So if you're stacking one side, it's St. Louis, but as we seem to always say with St. Louis, not a team you like to stack on FanDuel because they're a team that doesn't have a whole lot of power. But Matt Holliday is back, so maybe a four guy stack would be all right. You know, you get yourself Colton Wong, Matt Carpenter, Matt Holliday. Maybe see who else you can slot in there, whoever is in the top 5 of that lineup. But this is one of those ones where you want to stack the whole team or kind of avoid because Bartolo Colon's still a fine pitcher.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a better DK stack than a FanDuel stack because you can get 5 to 6 Cardinals, and they can pay it off collectively, but it's not fun to own 4 bats in that Cardinals lineup, have them play relatively well, and then lop off that 5th bat and have it be the big score, whether that's Jason Hayward or Johnny Peralta or Matt Holliday. You got Wong and you've got Carpenter. These are all very good hitters, but not a single one stands out as the must-have bat in that group. Yep. They're all very good. So if you're going to be stacking, I like it better on DK where you can get 5 to 6. Maybe throw Yadi or Molina in there and fill your catcher position. Even though Yadi hasn't been Yadi of old this year, he's been more like old Yadi this year. But that's a stack that I like more on DK than FanDuel. But Bartolo Colon, not a terrible pitcher, but at this point, he's a very predictable pitcher. He's throwing fastballs, and when he's not locating perfectly, just doesn't have enough sizzle on that fastball to really put away hitters and make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. This next game, very stackable. San Francisco at Arizona, as it was last night. 8.5 run total. Close to a pick'em. Chase Anderson, a marginal favorite here and against Jake Peavy. And Peavy's had a couple okay starts recently, but did face Arizona. I mean, this was back in April when he was healthy and got roughed up pretty bad. This is a game that I expect big things from both sides. I know you like the Giants once again. Arizona, a team that last night put up some big numbers as well. And you've got some decent prices on some guys that have had big games. I mean, last night David Peralta had 3 hits. 2 of them were triples. So David Peralta, a guy in play. AJ Pollock, of course, Paul Goldschmidt. I don't mind stacking both sides of this. And one way you can definitely go with this one is go on DK or FanDuel. Get yourself your favorite 4 players from each team and stack them together, because you obviously, it's not a situation where you're worried about which catcher to decide. You're going Buster Posey. And then your outfielders are going to, for the most part, be from the Arizona side. And that'll be a really fun way to make yourself a couple stacks in this game, because no one will be surprised to this being the highest scoring game.
No, this is actually home to my favorite 2 stacks of the night. I wrote the stacking article for Daily Fantasy Cafe today, and if you haven't checked that out, you'll get a better idea of why I like those stacks. But you got Chase Field, you got Jake Peavy with the fly ball tendencies at Chase Field. You got Chase Anderson, who has a reverse platoon split, which bolsters the value of right-handed batters Matt Duffy and Buster Posey, but not exactly great against left-handed batters either. So even their left-handed bats are in play as well. And then like I said, the fly ball tendencies are going to be a problem for Jake Peavy tonight. Not striking out a ton of batters. His control's been shaky in his 2 starts since being activated from the disabled list. So if he's issuing free passes and he's giving up fly balls, that's a recipe for a lot of runs scored. They scored double-digit runs collectively last night in a 6-5 extra innings affair. I could see very much the same thing happening again tonight. Quite a few runs. I think they're going to go over the total tonight, and I like both sides of that quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And like they were last night, Arizona was a really low-owned stack because they are expensive. So keep that in mind tonight. Definitely a cheap way to get some, or an expensive way, though, to get some big-time upside, because there's a lot of bats that can put up points in a hurry there.
Yep.
Next game, not so enticing. We got a game at Petco Field, 7-run total. Tyson Ross against Chad Bettis. Both guys that we talked about as GPP options earlier on the FanDuel podcast. Well, I talked about Chad Bettis as an option. But Tyson Ross, I know we both like. I'm considering him as a borderline cash game option tonight against the Colorado team that it has the worst walk rate among all teams against right-handed pitching. That's the one weakness that Ross has. I don't expect Colorado to do much. Charlie Blackmon really the only hitter I'm looking at tonight. And on the San Diego side, you're looking at guys like Upton and Kemp because they're hitting well. But Chad Bettis has been a decent pitcher. And, I mean, obviously Vegas thinks this one's going to stay low scoring. So for me, I don't even think I'll be going many stacks in this one. Maybe some one-ofs, but outside of that, still the worst hitter's park in the league. This is an avoid for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's an avoid from a hitter perspective for sure. As you said, the pitchers are in play. I think they're both strong GPP targets, and I'm with you. Ross is definitely a option in cash games, especially if you really like some of the other bats. Maybe you spin down from Corey Kluber to him. And considering we are talking up both pitchers, it's pretty safe to say that we don't like the bats in this one, and nor does Vegas. So that's one that I'm avoiding at all costs, basically.
Yeah, definitely an easy one to not stack. So next game up, we do have some interesting stacks. Boston at the LA Angels. This one's going to be interesting. We got Rick Porcello against Garrett Richards. 2 guys who, well, I won't say Porcello. Garrett Richards definitely has the stuff to give you some positive production. Struggled in his last start, though. Minus 140 favorite, 7.5 run total. Rick Porcello just has 0 velocity on his pitches now, so he's a guy that could be punished in a hurry by these LA bats. But we've also seen this Angels team be one of those teams that has a ton of potential but just struggles at times and completely disappears, so as they did last night. So this one's going to be interesting. I think if I'm going to stack one side of it, it's probably going to be the Angels against Porcello. Boston, not a terrible stack, but not a lot of guys that just really stand out. And Garrett Richards still does have good stuff. He's just inconsistent. So I'm not going out of my way to target him tonight.
In Richards' defense, I do like the fact that he's pitched better at home tonight. He's not a pitcher that I'm terribly enamored with. On a deep slate like this, I think you can do better. But again, I'm not going out of my way to target him either. I think the Red Sox will probably have lower ownership as a stack than they typically do because they are facing a good pitcher. So I guess you've got that angle if you're looking to stack. And they do have big bats. I mean, guys like Big Papi and Hanley Ramirez and Mookie Betts can really hit the ball very well. But I'm not going to go out of my way. This is another case where if you're going to trot out, double-digit lineups in GPPs, you can go ahead and give them a whirl because they do have upside, because they do have power. But if I'm stacking a side of this, it is going to be the Angels as well. We know Porcello struggles mightily with left-handed batters, so guys like Cole Calhoun, Matt Joyce, switch hitting Eric Ibar are going to get a lift tonight. And then you got righties that are basically pitcher-proof in Mike Trout and Albert Pujols. So definitely some depth to the stack. You can get probably 6 if you are playing on DraftKings, at least 5. And then on FanDuel, it's a pretty easy 1 through 4 stack if you're going to be running the Angels out there. I don't think there's anything to overthink there. You're going to have to get your Calhoun, Trout, and Pujols. There's no reason to get cute and go elsewhere. And then, but yeah, I'm not super enamored with either side of that. But if I'm picking one, it's going to be picking on Rick Porcello.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the final game of the night, Minnesota at Oakland, Scott Kazmir versus Phil Hughes. Minnesota, as we know, crushes lefties. Looking at the weather in this one, it's a big ballpark, of course, but gusty winds, 12 to 17 miles an hour, blowing out the right field. Kazmir is a guy who has been good at times, but struggled in his last start. I believe he left that game with an injury, actually, with a triceps injury. So the guy that may not be 100% against a team that mashes lefties, not as good on the road, but if I'm stacking one side, it's really hard to stack Oakland anyway. Minnesota's a really intriguing stack anytime they face a lefty, and I'm looking forward to getting myself some Minnesota stacks tonight.
Yeah, at least from a fantasy perspective, they crush lefties. A part of the lineup that we want to use is going to crush lefties. Bottom order, unfortunately, drags their overall team numbers down, but we know Plouffe kills lefties. We got Miguel Sano, who hasn't been in the big leagues for very long, but he's a righty that hits for a lot of power. But Dozier's a lefty killer. Torrey Hunter has hammered lefties throughout his career. And Joe Mauer, lefty. You like him better against a righty, but he makes a ton of contact. He works walks. He's a fine glue guy with this stack. You can go ahead and throw him in there because he's in the heart of all these power bats for the Twins. I think it's going to be a low-owned stack because the Twins just don't get enough love. But I like it a lot. Get yourself some Dozier, get yourself some Hunter, get yourself either Sano or Plouffe. Unfortunately, you can't get both because they are both only third base eligible on DK and FanDuel. But stick out a stack with each in it, and I'm a fan of that against Kazmir tonight. But even on DraftKings where you can stack 6, this is one where I'm only looking to stack 4, maybe 5 hitters, depending on who else is in the lineup. But yeah, this is a strong FanDuel stack for me, and one that I think is going to be low owned. And on the other side of things, Phil Hughes has a reverse platoon split, but I still like some of the left-handed bats for the A's. Guys like switch hitter Ben Zobrist, Josh Reddick, Stephen Vogt. It's a viable stack. It's not a world beater stack because we are in a pitcher-friendly ballpark, but there's some power in there. You've got some patient hitters in there. I like what they can do. They can string some hits together, and they do have a couple guys that can reach the seats if Phil Hughes and his lack of ground balls results in a ball finding the stands. Yeah,
I think that'll be a low-owned one as well. And with that, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Optimizer Colossus. Cheat sheets, a lot of great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.